Hi everyone, and welcome to our FFU Builder Quickstart Guide. My name is Richard Balsley. I'm a Principal Solution Engineer at Microsoft, and today we're going to go through how to build your first FFU using our Quickstart Guide. And if you're new, or if you've been working with FFU Builder for a while now, there is a brand new documentation website that includes the Quickstart Guide that we'll be following, but it also includes some sections here for the prerequisites and an overview of the different tabs in the user interface and what the options do within those tabs. Now, to build our first FFU, first thing we want to do is follow the prerequisites guide. Now, within the prerequisites, we have some recommendations at the top, and then we have the things that you need to install before we can install FFU Builder. From a recommendation standpoint, there's really two main recommendations. First, if you can do it, use an unmanaged Windows 11 or Windows Server machine. And the reason we want an unmanaged machine is because in a lot of the cases that we see where people run into issues, it's generally because of security software or security policies tend to get in the way. And that could be your antivirus, it could be your EDR, XDR software, it could be firewall. There's just a number of different things that can get in the way that the automation that is done through FFU Builder could potentially cause some problems. So if you can avoid it, try to avoid having a machine that's managed. And when I say managed, that means managed by Intune. Could even be managed by Active Directory, depending on the policies that you're setting through group policy. It could be a third party that you're using for management. But in general, security software is generally what we see most people have problems with. We'll have a more in-depth document on the things to look for from a security standpoint. There is some logging and some error handling, depending on the errors that you run into, that might give you an idea of what you should do if you run into those situations. Now, disk space. Disk space is very important because FFUs can get very big very quick. By default, we use a 30 gig dynamic VHD file, and that VHD is a dynamic 50 gig disk. So it doesn't start out at 50 gigs, but as you install Windows and as you install applications and various other things, that 50 gigs can grow really fast. In fact, the latest updated Windows media, the VHDX by itself is usually around 15 gigs. And if you service that media with the latest cumulative update, so right now it's February 2026. Right now it's about 15 gigs if you just install the latest updated media. If you service it with the latest CU on top of that media, then it generally grows the VHDX by about double, so you get to about 30 gigs. And then if you install Office, apps, drivers, all that other stuff, that starts to chew up a lot of disk space as well. So we recommend that you have about 100 gigs of free disk space, but that number, you might even need to size the VM larger than 50 gigs, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. What we'll want to do, if you've never done any of this before, you've got your unmanaged machine, you just installed Windows on it, the first thing you want to do is enable Hyper-V. We've got a link on how to do that. You'll want to install PowerShell 7. We have a link on how to do that. My recommendation, use Winget to do it. Run this command that you see here. If you can't use Winget, maybe it's blocked, maybe it's broken on your machine, whatever the case might be, you can download the MSI file. Do not use the Windows Store version though, as that has some known limitations. And we've seen some people use that version and it causes some issues. So just make sure that you're using either the Winget install or the MSI. You'll also want to create a Hyper-V switch. Once Hyper-V has been enabled and you have rebooted the machine, create either an external or internal switch. I believe there's also a default switch. You should be able to use any of those switches. I personally just use an external switch, so anytime you see me demo or see me in the discussion forum or anything, I'm usually talking about using external switches. That's just because that's what I have on my machine, but any of the switches really shouldn't matter. All of them should work for what you need. You also want to download the latest release, and so if you haven't done that yet, just click on the link, and this will take you to the latest releases page. The latest release is 2602.1, and you just want to scroll down and click on Assets and then Source Code. So once you click on this, it'll download the zip file. And then here in the zip file, we see the build. So what we want to do is we want to take the build, just copy out the FFU development folder, and then put that on your C drive. Okay, and then let's go back to the guide. Now in the guide, we say after extraction, you'll most likely need to unblock the files because they're tagged with a mark of the web. And so what you generally do in this situation is if you've downloaded something from the internet, you can't run it. It's typically because there's the file came from another computer and might be blocked to help protect this computer. So you would click on block and then that would fix it. However, there's a lot of files in here that you have to unblock. So instead, we can just recurse through all of those using PowerShell. So you can run this command here, and this will allow you to unblock. So open up a PowerShell window, and then just run that. And so that will unblock the files, and it'll allow you to run FFU Builder. If you don't do that, you'll get an error message, and you'll have to go and do that anyway. So go ahead and do that. And then if you are using a different drive, some people might decide to use the D drive. If that's the case, then you just need to replace C FFU development with D FFU development. And once you've done that, you're ready to run. So let's go ahead and run build FFU VM _ UI.ps1. And when you do that, you'll see the UI. Okay, so we're done with that. Now we're ready to go and follow the Quickstart guide. So the Quickstart guide will have you go through, and at the end of all of this, you will have a USB drive with an FFU that contains the following. It'll contain Windows 11 25H2. It'll have the latest Windows and .NET cumulative updates, Defender, its platform updates, its definitions, and the Windows Security Center application. You'll also get the latest Edge, OneDrive, malicious software removal tool, and the latest current channel version of the Microsoft 365 apps. We will also go through and use Winget to install the company portal application into the FFU, and we'll also be downloading some drivers. Now, this video is not going to go in depth into driver management. You can go through and look at, there's another video that's a bit older that goes through that, but also we have in the documentation for drivers, there's a much longer deep dive in drivers and how it all works. So you can go look at that as well. So let's get started. So we did the prereqs. Now we need to actually start using the tool and start configuring things. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go through Hyper-V, and you're going to keep this for the most part at default. Just make sure to select your virtual switch or your VM switch name. And this should automatically show up here. You'll probably see a default switch and the switch you made. Just go ahead and select the switch that you made. And then it should detect the IP address. You shouldn't have to put an IP address in here. If you need to, and you don't see your VM switch, you can type the name of your switch and you can type the IP address of the switch as well. So we'll just keep the one that gets detected. And then for the disk size, for this quick start, we can keep these at the defaults. If you are building an FFU though, and you have a lot of applications and you need more size, you may want to increase from 50 gigs to 100 gigs. It really depends on what you're installing. If you're installing Photoshop or some other really large application or a bunch of apps, if you're running like a computer lab or something, if you've got a dozen apps that you're installing, 50 gigs is probably not going to be enough. So you just want to make sure to increase the size. And then everything else we'll keep at the defaults. One thing to note is logical sector size. In most cases, 512 is going to be the right number to pick. However, if you have any 4K drives or any devices that ship with UFS drives, then you'll need to change those to 4096. If you get this value wrong and you build your FFU and you deploy it to a device that requires a 4096 value for the logical sector size, if that's the case, you'll get an error message and it'll tell you that you have a mismatched logical sector size. You'll have to rebuild the FFU. So for now, we're going to keep this at 512. And for Windows settings, the guide is just going to have you go through and use the defaults. The older video that I've recorded, watch that if you want some more details about how this works, or read the UI overview documentation. There's a lot of settings in here to go through. But by default, if you keep the ISO path blank and you just use the default settings that are here, this will actually go and download from the media creation tool. It uses the same content, the same ESD file from the media creation tool. It'll download the Windows 11 25H2 x64 English Pro consumer media from the media creation tool. If you pass an ISO here, then it's going to do whatever ISO you pass. You'll put the ISO in here, and then it'll give you the options for which Windows release, the Windows version. It'll unlock a lot of things that you can't select right now. So given that this is a quick start guide, we're just going to allow this to go download the media, and then it's going to go through and do what we need. If you are using, or if you require a different language, then you can go ahead and select the language you want. But for the purposes of this demo, this quick start, we're just going to go through and download the Windows 11 25H2 x64 Pro media. For updates, we're going to keep these at default. Like I mentioned, this is what you're going to install, as I mentioned earlier. And for applications, we're going to select install Winget apps, and then we're going to select check Winget status. What this will do is it'll go through and check your Winget version and the module, the PowerShell module. Most of you, if this is the first time you're doing this, you probably never installed the PowerShell module for Winget. And if that's the case, it'll install it for you. And what we want to do here is we want to just search for company portal. And we have the company portal app, and then we're going to click on save app list.json. And then we just want to make sure that that's saved in the apps folder, which by default it should take you directly to that folder. If it doesn't, just make sure you're going to your C FFU development apps and make sure that it's saved there. For Office, we're going to go and download Office. This is going to get the latest current channel version of Office. So we explain in the guide that we're downloading the 64-bit current channel version of Office with Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. And it will download the currently installed language of the operating system. So my operating system language is English, and the XML file that we use to go do the download is saying to use match OS. So we're going to match the current OS that we're currently using to go and download that language of Office. So if you need to change that, you can, and we explain how to do that in the link right here. Next thing is drivers. So we can spend hours talking about drivers. That's not the intent of this video. This video is just really intended to get you started quickly. And so what we're going to do for drivers is we're going to actually download an HP version, or an HP model. In this case, we're going to look at HP EliteBook 850 G8. So if we select the download drivers checkbox, we need to select get models. This is going to go out to HP. There's a tool called HPIA that a lot of customers use to download drivers for HP models. And so we're basically just kind of reverse engineering what they do. And so we're grabbing the XML products cab from them, and then we pull that into here so we can search for the drivers and download them. So in our case, we're going to do the 850 G8, and there it is. Now when you're downloading drivers, what you'll notice in the model name is there's this value in parentheses. This is the system ID. So the system ID is useful because this is how we do automatic matching when it comes time to deploy the FFU to a machine. We use this system ID to match what is in WMI of the device. And if those match, then we'll install the drivers for that model. So we want to select this model, and then we want to make sure that we're clicking on save drivers.json. And then the drivers.json, we'll just need to make sure that we're navigating to the drivers folder and save that file into drivers.json. And now, because we're only downloading one model, we have two options here. We can either select install drivers to FFU, or we can select copy drivers to USB. Whichever one you check, the other one is going to get grayed out. So you can only do one or the other. In most cases, if you're only building one FFU for one model, then it's perfectly fine to install the drivers to that FFU. However, as I mentioned, in most cases, most people will have multiple models that they manage. So you aren't just going to search for one, you might search for a couple, or maybe a dozen, or maybe 50. I don't know. There's a lot of customers have a lot of different models that they manage. And in those situations, you don't want to have all of your drivers in one FFU. So based on the Quickstart guide, we mentioned here that if you need to manage multiple models, it's best to select copy drivers to the USB drive. The main reason for this is that it's going to keep the FFU files small, and it'll allow FFU Builder to automatically select the right drivers at deployment time based on the system information queried via WMI. So we do not want to install the drivers directly to the FFU. I see a lot of people in the discussion section of the repo saying that their FFU size is like 100 gigs. And when I ask why, it's because they've put a lot of drivers in the FFU. If you do that, your driver store in Windows gets very, very large. And it doesn't need to be that large. You're wasting a lot of disk space on the machines that you're deploying to. So if you're doing more than one model, make sure that you're selecting copy drivers to USB drive. Now, if disk space is a problem on the USB drive, you can then select compressed driver model folder to WIM. What that'll do is it'll take the driver folders that we've downloaded and it compresses them to a WIM file. We then copy those WIM files to the USB drive. So when it comes time to deploy, we'll do the automatic matching, figure out which WIM file to use. Then we will extract the drivers from the WIM file so that way they could be injected to the device at deployment time. And in our situation right now, we're not going to select copy PE drivers, but for those of you that need PE drivers, and not all models need PE drivers, but in some cases you will. If that's the case, you can then select copy PE drivers, and you can either put the PE drivers that you need right in the PE drivers folder, or you can select use drivers folder as PE driver source. What that'll do is it'll go into the drivers folder and it'll find all the drivers in here that match the class GUID for the device types that we want to put into WinPE. So not all class GUIDs are actually going to be copied in. So what this means is that things like storage, things like system devices, keyboard, mouse, touch, those kinds of things will be copied in to your WinPE media to allow you to interact with the device as you need to. We won't copy in video, we won't copy in audio, we won't copy in the big drivers that can make the WinPE media really, really large. So if you need PE drivers, then you can use drivers folder as PE driver source. There's one catch to this. If you put your own drivers into PE drivers, if you put something into this folder, and then you select that option to copy PE drivers and use drivers folder as PE driver source, this will overwrite whatever you put in to PE drivers. It does not merge. We will fix that so that it does merge because it makes sense to me that it should merge. But right now, the way that this works is that we'll go through your drivers folder and we'll find all the system or the class GUIDs that are necessary for PE. We'll find all those. We'll just recurse through all the folders in here, and then we'll copy them to PE drivers. And when we do that, it overwrites whatever is in this folder instead of merging it. So if you put something in there, I understand that not all device types have the drivers you need for PE. So for instance, Surface does not provide the PE drivers that are necessary in the MSI files that you can download directly from them. There's a separate download for the components in PE. And so because of that, you actually may find that even though you're copying the drivers for Surface into PE and you think, hey, this all should work, it won't, because a lot of the devices have Windows 11 only drivers, and we need the Windows 10 PE related drivers of those drivers that are only provided for Windows 11. So because of that, you'll find that you may have some issues with that. So the long story short is that if you need PE drivers, in most cases, you should be fine with using drivers folder as PE driver source. But there will be some situations where you want to merge another driver in. You won't be able to do that right now. Okay, so we've saved our drivers.json. We're not going to do copy PE drivers for this situation, and we're not going to compress. So the guide just has you do this. So that's what we'll do. Now the build tab. So the build tab, there's a lot here, and we're not going to go over all of this right now. But you can read the docs, and we'll actually have even a deeper dive video, but I wanted to get a quick start one out for everyone. So for the build tab, we're going to spend most of our time here actually figuring out how to build the USB drive. And so the first part of building the USB drive is to figure out which drives to actually use that are connected to your machine. Now, the way that this used to work was that we would just copy everything to all drives that are that are connected. But in some cases, people are going to have external disks that might have personal data on them. And if you're building images and stuff, I would have a purpose-built machine just to build images. I wouldn't really use my main desktop. You can, but you just start mixing things, and it's best to have something that's separate. But if you're in that situation where you've got multiple disks or whatever, we can handle that, so that way we're getting the right drives. Now for build USB drive settings, depending on your drive type, so I've got a drive here. I'm just going to try to show this on camera here, but I've got a Samsung SSD. It's a portable SSD. It's very fast, very quick drive. It's USB 3. And by the way, USB 3, all of you should be using at least USB 3, 3.1. I don't even know where we're at anymore with USB 3, 3.2, 4. I think USB 4 is coming out. So anything USB 3 and above is going to be good for this. Anything less than that, you're going to have a hard time, because the FFU files are so big. So you want to make sure you're using fast USB media. But these drives, the drive that I just showed you, it's an SSD. It's an external SSD, so it's an external hard drive. It's not actually removable media. So in Windows, we have external media, and then we also have removable disks. And because of that, we have to know how to handle each of those disks. And so if you know that you're using external hard disks like I am, I'm going to use this drive to do the imaging. So if I'm going to use this drive, I need to make sure that I'm selecting allow external hard disk media. Now, when I select that, there's this option here that says prompt for external hard disk media. And the reason that this exists is because a lot of people will have an external hard disk that has personal information on it, like I mentioned earlier. And if that's the case, we can prompt to say, hey, we want to use this drive, but there's also another drive that's connected to the machine. And if that's the case, then we need to prompt so you can select the right drive. We don't just want to, start formatting the other disks that are on the machine. We want to make sure they're actually formatting the right drive. And so this is actually legacy behavior from when the PowerShell script was just a PowerShell script, and we were doing it all through the command line. And so we wanted to make sure that we're prompting in these scenarios. But now that we have a user interface, we can actually give you the capability to select specific drives. So in my case, I've got this drive, and I'm going to plug it in. And then once this drive is plugged in, I can click Check USB Drives. And so now I can select which drive I want to use. And if I had multiple drives, I can put a second one in. And then I can check that drive. And so now I've got 2 drives in here. And we use the unique ID to figure out which drive to copy to. So when you're selecting and you've got a bunch of different drives, and they all have like the same model name, like you might have bought like 10 different USB sticks from somewhere. If that's the case, you'll have a bunch of them, all the same name. But if you don't want to use all of them, somehow they're connected for whatever reason, but you only want to just go to one drive, then you can specify what that drive is, and then we'll use the unique ID to copy the FFU and the related content to that drive. Now, The other options here, copy Autopilot profile, provisioning package, and additional FFU files, we won't be doing those. But copy unattend XML, this is important to understand because this is how we do naming. And I understand naming this can be way more intuitive, but how we historically did naming via the command line when we were doing this all just via PowerShell script, we didn't have a user interface for it. It required us to use unattend XML because we do the naming during after we lay the FFU down, we copy in an unattend XML file, which allows us to set the computer name. So the copying of the unattend XML doesn't mean that you have to create an XML. We provide the XML file for you. In fact, if you go into the unattend folder, you'll find that there are two unattend XMLs, one for x64, one for ARM64, and then there's a sample unattend XML file for x64. And the sample file just shows you how you can configure the XML if you have additional things in unattend that you want to do. So like in this case, there's some run asynchronous commands, and then there's also some ubi system commands for setting the locale, the language, so on and so forth. So if all you care about is just naming the machine, then you don't have to modify the unattend at all. We'll actually use this, for most people, it's going to be the unattend _x64. We'll use this one. And all you have to do is just check the box that says copy unattend.xml. And when you do that, if you do nothing else, it'll prompt you to type a name in. However, if you want to get a little bit more advanced, you can create a prefixes file. Now there's a sample one in here, and it's not very complicated at all. You basically put your prefix in, and then we will append the serial number to that prefix. So if I were to rename this file to prefixes.txt, it'll use this file. In fact, I'll just go ahead and do that now. And by doing this, I will get prompted at deployment time which prefix I want to use, because there are 4 of them in here. If I only have one prefix I want to use, and I don't want someone to be prompted to enter anything, then I can delete these. And if there's only a single prefix, then it'll just use that prefix. It won't prompt me at all. But in a lot of cases, we have different locations, different naming, there's just different things that we need to do. And so in this example, we would be prompted for whatever prefix we want to use. So we'll keep that. And then everything else should be set to the defaults. So we talked about the name, device name, multiple prefixes, and then post-build cleanup. So we'll just keep everything else at the default, and then build FFU. One thing to note here is the bits priority. For bits priority, if you can do it, set it to foreground. Most people should probably be okay setting this to foreground. However, when I say our, I mean Microsoft, the Microsoft recommendation is to keep this set to normal for bandwidth reasons internally. If you're working in an organization and you want to be a good consumer of the network, keeping your bits priority set to normal will make it so that your bits downloads are slower, but you're not consuming too much of the network. Now, in my environment, it doesn't matter. I can just set everything to foreground. So if you want things to go fast and you want to maximize your download speeds, set this to foreground. If you want to slow them down and make sure you're a good consumer of the network and you're not chewing up all the bandwidth, then set this to normal. So I'm going to keep this at foreground. Everything else should be kept at the defaults, and then we'll go ahead and build. Now I'm going to pause the video, let this thing build. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about what we're seeing, but I'll come back once the build is at a point where I think that there might be something interesting to talk about. Okay, so we're at the first interesting thing to do, and that is we need to start entering credentials to download the company portal. So we finished doing the driver download, and then there's some ADK stuff that we just validated that we have the latest ADK, and then now we're starting to download the Winget apps. And we're getting this prompt here that says we need to authenticate. And the reason we need to authenticate is because this machine is not joined to Entra ID. It's not hybrid joined. It has no idea about any sort of Entra ID account because it's a workgroup machine. So because of that, we need to authenticate to download the applications from the Microsoft Store source repository from Winget. So you're going to get prompted twice to do this if you're not joined to an Entra ID tenant. So I'm signing in off screen here just so you don't see the account or the password of the MFA request. So just give me a brief moment here. Okay, so that has been done. And then one thing you will get is a sign in to all apps and websites and services on this device. I would choose no, because I don't want my device joined to my tenant. If I did that, I shouldn't get prompted again. But I want to keep this separate from my tenant. I don't want any policies because I've got Defender for Endpoint, and I've got other things that are in my tenant that are on my other devices that I don't want on my build machine. So in this scenario, I'm going to select no, this app only. And I know you can't see the screen, but you're going to get a screen that looks like that and just say no to this app only. And so that's going to go, it's going to download the app, and this download can, for whatever reason, yesterday this was taking a little while. I don't know if it's the same today, but with the company portal, the dependencies, okay, it's going much faster today. Yesterday it was going very, very slow. But we're seeing the apps, the app dependencies come down, and then we should see the company portal app. Yep, that's here too. And then so now I'm getting prompted a second time off screen. And this is for the license file. And you would see that in the logging. I think the logging doesn't show, but the logging will tell you may be prompted twice for credentials, once for the app and the other is for the license file. So in the folder, you'll see there is no license file. As soon as I finish authenticating over here, we will get the license file. Okay. And make sure to say no to this app only. And now you'll see got the license file and the YAML file. So everything we need is there, and we should now be moving on to downloading Office. So this can take a little while. So I'll pause again, and if there's anything interesting, I'll come back and explain it. Okay, so there is something interesting that I did want to talk about here, and that's when we download the ESD file. The ESD file is usually up to date now. It wasn't in the past for Windows 10, and even earlier Windows 11 releases, we weren't getting an updated ESD file from the media creation tool. That's changed now. So now we are getting an up-to-date file. And so you can tell when you look at the version number for the ESD, the file name includes the version number, but it also includes the date. So this 260109, that means that it was January 9th of 2026. So this is up-to-date media. However, it's still installing and downloading the cumulative updates. And the reason it's doing that is because January of 2026 was a really odd month from an update perspective. We released a couple of out-of-band patches, and those out-of-band patches actually do get pulled into this process. So if there's an out-of-band CU that comes out, that actually replaces the Patch Tuesday cumulative update. So if you're running into any issues, or if there's an out-of-band patch that comes out that fixes a problem, or it takes care of like some zero-day security issue, we will be able to pull that patch. However, we aren't pulling preview releases. We can pull preview releases, but the settings that we have for the Quickstart here say to use the update latest cumulative updates, which grays out the ability for us to pull the preview cumulative update. But if we were to uncheck this and check update preview cumulative update, then we would grab the latest preview CU. Now preview CUs obviously, depending on when you're doing it, the previous CU actually could be older than the latest cumulative update from Patch Tuesday. So in most cases, most people probably don't need to do preview cumulative updates. You're most likely going to be fine with just having update the latest cumulative update. But even still, if you're using the latest ESD media, outside of out-of-band patches, you really should just have the latest ESD media with the latest cumulative update, and you probably should never even need to download updates unless you're running into a timing issue where Patch Tuesday just hits. Like if Patch Tuesday hit right now, today, then I won't have the latest media because the media takes a couple, 2-3 days for that to be updated. So if that's the case, then I might download the CU and have to service my media. But if it's been 2-3 days, the latest media should come out and I shouldn't have to even download the latest CU. And if that's the case, it'll check. The script's smart enough to go through and look to see, do I have the latest CU in the media? If I don't, then I'm going to download it. If I do have it, then I'm just going to skip it and move on. So we've downloaded the media. We've downloaded the CUs. We're now creating the virtual hard disk. And so this is going to take some time. I'll pause it. I'll come back when there's something else that's interesting. Okay, so we're at the point now where the VM has spun up. We've installed Windows to the VHDX file, and it's been serviced, and now it's ready to boot. So this is going to boot into audit mode, and what you'll notice at the same time that this happens is that we're going to create some WinPE capture media. So that media will get created at the same time as the VM is being built. And so you should see this pop up on your screen. If you don't, generally it probably means that you didn't have Hyper-V open, and that's fine. You don't need Hyper-V open in order for us to create the FFU. It'll create the VM and it'll do all that stuff behind the scenes regardless of whether or not you have Hyper-V Manager open or not. But if you want to follow along and watch what the VM's doing, then you can open up Hyper-V and just open up the FFU file. Or I'm sorry, the FFU VM. And the FFU VM is this underscore FFU dash, and then there's just some random numbers that we use to create the FFU name. So this is the VM name. Select that, and then just open it up, and you should start to see it loading. And let's take a moment, and I'll come back when this is installing some stuff. Okay, so the install's going now, and this will go through and it'll run what's called the FFU Builder Orchestrator. And so the orchestrator just runs a number of PowerShell scripts to go through and install the updates for Defender, for Edge, OneDrive, all the things that we selected earlier. And it can take a little bit of time for it to run through all of this. One thing that I just want to make sure people don't do is don't start clicking into here. If you click into here and you don't quite understand what happens when you click, what this will do is this will put you into a selection mode. So when you click into here, it gets into selection mode, and this window looks like it freezes. And it's like it's not doing anything. But in fact, it actually is doing stuff. You can probably notice back down here in the taskbar, it actually isn't doing things. But this will all look frozen. And we've had some users complain that things are stuck or they're frozen, they're broken, they're not working the way they expected to. That's most likely because someone clicked into the window and now you're stuck in selection mode. And because this thing takes up the entire window, it's very easy to just kind of click into here and then think everything's just broken. So if you ever get stuck in this state, just hit enter, and then now it'll show you where it's actually at. So in this case, we're on install Office. So if we look behind the scenes, Office hasn't actually installed yet, but we should start to see the Office icons show up here momentarily. And then once this goes through and installs Office, it's going to start to install some other things. This is going to take a little while. I'll pause the video again, come back when it's complete. But you're in a good spot if you just see this run and it starts to install Office, company portal, all that other stuff. Just sit back, relax, just let it do its thing. Don't really click on a bunch of other stuff. Just let it be. Okay, so our apps are done installing, and now we're going through and we're running Sysprep. So this whole process is, for the most part, complete. We're just going to wait for Sysprep to finish off what it's doing, and then we should be in a good spot. And what you can see here is that Office installed. We have the company portal app here like we expected, and then OneDrive, Edge, Defender, all of those things were updated as well. And so now we're just waiting for Sysprep to finish. Okay, so now we're doing the capture. And what you'll see here is during the capture, we output quite a bit of information just to the command console so we can see what's going on. Most of the time, you don't have to really worry too much about this. This is just going through and figuring out what the Windows installation is on the machine so we can give the device a name. So in our case, we're naming it Windows 11 25H2 Pro, and then just putting the date on it. And what you'll also notice here is that we connect to a network share. Basically, we're connecting back through to your host to copy the FFU file. So this is the FFU capture share and the FFU username. You actually see these things if you look at in the UI on the build tab. There's a username for your FFU user, and then there's a share name. And so we're using these to copy the FFU file out of the VM to your drive. So what you'll see when the copy starts, which it's started now, is if everything works correctly, then we should see an FFU file copying right here. So this file will be pretty large, probably going to be 20-ish gigs, somewhere around there. And it's because we have Office in there, we install company portal, we service the media, so it's going to be a fairly large FFU file. Actually, no, the FFU file itself might not actually be that big. I think it's going to be small. I think it's going to be like 14 gigs instead. The larger size was the VHDX file, but the FFU file itself should be smaller than that. It'll be roughly about 14 gigs thereabouts, unless Office changed in the last few days or so. But yeah, 14 gigs. So at 14 gigs, we copy out the DISM file. Just if we need to troubleshoot something, the DISM file from the VM is there, and it should be done. So once it's done, we turn off the VM, and then we start actually getting ready to create the USB drive. So once you have the FFU file, we have to make sure that we optimize it and make sure that it's ready to be deployed to a physical device. And so the optimization process, that's what allows us to take an FFU file and put it on any size disk. If we don't optimize the FFU, then there are only certain devices that we can add that FFU to based on the size of the FFU. So if we captured from I guess in our case, we had a 50 gig disk. If we're capturing from a 50 gig disk, then we have to put it on a 50 gig disk in order for us to use all the space of that machine. But oftentimes you're going to have disks that are much, much larger. So if you've got a drive that's 256 gigs, but we're capturing an FFU from a VM that's only 50 gigs, well, if you don't optimize it, then that 256 gig disk isn't going to show up as 256 gigs. It's going to show up as 50. So we need to use optimization in order for that to work. So there's a switch called optimize-FFU that we run to optimize the FFU file so it can be sized appropriately to the device type that we're applying the FFU to. So that's what's going to happen here in a moment once we get through this 2-minute sleep. So we'll come back to that when it starts going. Okay, so the optimization is taking place now, and just to also talk about this, optimize, in most cases, you're going to keep this on all the time. The only time I turn this off is if I'm testing something and I don't care about the size of the FFU. I just need to test the deployment of it just to see, if my apps are working or if there's something that someone complained about wasn't working anymore, like we made some code changes and something broke. Then just for time reasons, I'll turn it off. But if I need to deploy this out to a device that's going to be used by someone, I want to make sure that's on. So in most cases, you're going to keep Optimize on all the time. And when Optimize is running, it does take a little while to run. We mentioned here that it'll take a few minutes. So just let that run, and you'll have an FFU that should be able to be sized on any disk. Okay, so optimization is complete. And then after that, it's just post-processing. We just start cleaning up a lot of the things that we created. So like that capture share, that FFU user, we remove both of those. We clean up the VM, and we clean up any unused mount points. And then we start building our deployment media. So the deployment media, this is the Windows P ISO that we'll create. And that ISO will be added to our USB drive. Okay, so the WinPE media was created and now it's building the USB drive. So in our case, we selected OneDrive to build, and it's copying right now. And actually it's pretty quick because it's using that SSD instead of using just a regular removable USB 3 drive. So in that, it copied all the content and everything's good. It took about 30 minutes in total to do all of that. And so the build times are going to be fairly long, but the deployment time is going to be very, very short. You're going to see that here in a minute as I go through and demo the deployment process of the FFU. But what we're left with is when we look at the drives, I'm actually going to take one of these drives out. So the drive that is left here, this is the FFU file. And then the drivers, in our case, this is the HP driver folder. It's got all the drivers from HP. And it has the driver mapping file. This was automatically created. And this will, if you had multiple models, you would have each of those listed here. And so in this case, we just had one model, the HP EliteBook 850G8, with the driver path and the system ID. The drivers.json isn't really used for the deployment, but we just copy the whole folder. So everything that's in that drivers folder besides the git keep file, we'll pull all that stuff over. So you'll have a copy of your drivers.json if you want it, so you can reuse it later if you need to. If you reinstall FFU Builder or something and you just want to import it, you'll have that ability if you want. And then we have our unattend and with our prefixes. So we've got our unattend, the prefixes file. This is what's going to do the naming for us, or it's going to prompt us. Well, the expectation here is that we should be prompted for one of these prefixes. So I'm going to set up a VM to do this. We won't be using a physical device, but I'll set up a VM to test this and show you what that looks like. Okay, so we've got our VM, and now let's start the VM and get this FFU installed. Okay, so we start it up, and we're going to boot off of the boot media. And this is what the experience would be like if you were building your own physical machine. So you'll see that we're using FFU Builder 2602.1 preview, and we've detected a single attached disk, and we have some system information: manufacturer, the model, serial number, processor, how much memory, disk size, and the logical sector size. And this is what I was talking about earlier, where the logical sector size, depending on the device that you have, could either be 512 or 4096. And so if there is a problem deploying your FFU and you have a mismatched logical sector size, we can understand whether that's the case or not. And if that is the case, then we can display an error message if your FFU that you're trying to apply is the wrong logical sector size. We also pull some BIOS information as well, and the system ID. Now, because I'm using a VM, there is no system ID, but this is what you would find for if you're using a OEM device. We will collect the system ID information. That's how we use to do the matching to install the drivers. You'll also see that we have the FFU file was found. There's just one FFU on the USB drive, and so that's what we see here. And then this is our device name selection. So this is where we can select the prefix. So just put the number of what you want. So I'll just put 1 here. And so it's going to name the device, the prefix, plus whatever the serial number is. So in this case, 1234, and then the serial number is 1086. So if you look up here for serial, it tells you it's 1086 and this long long string. And we truncate that to 15 characters, so it won't exceed that amount. And it is trying to do matching on the model and the name, but there was no matching driver mapping rule found, so it's falling back to manual selection. And so what this means is that if you have multiple drivers, like multiple folders, then it'll ask you to pick which folder you want to use for your drivers. But in our case, there was only a single driver source found, so it's just going to add these HP EliteBook 850 drivers, even though that it's not really going to matter because it's a VM, so these drivers don't apply. However, it's going to add them anyway, just because that's what I had in the folder. So if this was your physical machine, it would see that there's one folder, and it would just install if the automatic matching didn't work. So depending on the model that you selected, the automatic matching should work fine, and then it'll match and install the drivers as necessary. So we've applied the FFU, and you saw that was fairly quick. And then now we're doing some unattended work. This is copying in that unattended file to do the naming. And then we are installing drivers. And this, as it says, this may take a while, depending on the model that you're doing. Driver installation does tend to take a couple minutes. So this actually takes longer than applying the FFU. The FFU generally goes pretty quick, and as you saw, it was fairly quick. And so we'll give this a minute here, then we'll come back once it's finished. Okay, so driver selection finished, and once driver selection is done, driver servicing or driver injection is done, the process goes fairly quick after that. So now that it's done, we're going to boot into Windows, and it's going to do plug and play matching for the drivers that were added, and that usually takes a couple minutes for it to do. So we'll just wait for that to finish, and then we should get to the first screen of the out-of-box experience. All right, and so now we have completed the process. So at this point, you can, if you're using Autopilot, you'd go through that flow. If you're using a provisioning package, you can apply the provisioning package to the machine. What I like to do when I'm testing is I like to use a provisioning package to apply to the machine. That way I can get through Ubi, just so I can get to a standard admin logon without a standard local admin logon without having to go through the out-of-box experience, just to test out everything. But if you're using Autopilot, or if you want to connect it to Entra and validate your test that way, then you can do that too. But I like to use a provisioning package. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm hitting the Windows key 5 times. That gets me to this menu. I can select Install Provisioning Package. And then this is going to install that package. It just creates a local admin account. It bypasses all of the out-of-box experience. And so it's a very simple way to get through the out-of-box experience and getting into the virtual machine to just validate that everything that I had configured through the FFU is actually complete. So this will take a moment for it to reboot. And then you can see everything applied. And then once this is done, we should get to the logon screen. And there it is. So let's sign in. And then this is going to do the first run experience. This generally takes about 90 seconds to 2 minutes. So we'll wait for that. Okay, so because we're going through that the first logon experience with just doing a local admin account, we're going to get privacy setting. Like, we're going to get a lot of stuff that you typically wouldn't see if you're going through Autopilot. So just hit next just to get through all this. And because it's a pro install, we're going to have a lot of things in here that you might not expect, like games, Xbox. A lot of this stuff I generally will just get rid of through Intune. but because it's just a Consumer Pro install, there's going to be a lot of consumer stuff on here that you might not want. But this kind of just shows the process end to end. We get into the VM. We can look at this PC. We can see the full disk is here. So this is a 128 gig disk. That's the default that Hyper-V creates, a 128 gig dynamic disk. So we've got that. We see our deploy drive. This is what we use to install the VM with. So this is our FFU file, and then here's the log file. And so pull up this log file. And the script log.txt, this is what we log to as the process is going. So you know, we're in a VM, so it tells us that we're running in a VM, and we're going to get the information of the VM and the disk information. We go through and we lay all the stuff down. And so this is just a good file to look at if you need to troubleshoot anything. If you're running into issues, I may ask you to give me the file so that way I can take a look at it. And then we'll see here all the drivers that were installed on the machine. If there's any issues with any of the drivers, this is a good place to look. And so we capture all of that information. And once that's done, it's pretty straightforward after the fact. And so end to end for the deployment to this VM, we go, it's 4:35, and we started at 4:31. So about 4 minutes, give or take, to lay down the FFU and to do the drivers. If we didn't do drivers, then this would have taken, what, 4:32, 4:33. So 4:33 and 4:31. So 2 minutes, about 2 minutes, 16 seconds or so. So not bad. Not bad to get the FFU laid down. Depending on the speed of your machine, it could take longer, it could take short, could be shorter. But in most cases, you're probably not going to get much faster than 2 minutes. That's usually a pretty good time. And that's with a 14 gig FFU. That's got Windows, it's got Office, it's got the latest updates that we had talked about earlier. So for all of that, it's pretty quick. Probably not going to find a faster way of deploying. And with that, you know, you can even come in here and start checking, like, is Edge completely up to date? You know, we installed the latest version of Edge, so how do we validate that? Well, go into here, go to About, check for updates, Edge is up to date. If you go to look at Windows updates, go to Settings, go to Windows Update, Update History. There's just a driver update, and that's just some driver for Hyper-V, most likely. And if I check for updates, there's probably going to be a Defender definition update. There usually always is. And so we see that. And then it looks like there's a platform update that we're not pulling in as well. So sometimes these things can get out of sync, but you're still much closer than if you were using just the default ISO without the Defender updates installed. Yeah, and so with that, that's it. So if you have any questions, feel free to post a question in the discussions section of the repo. And with that, I'll see you next time.